This week, we're back in the Devil's Den for our country's birthday and a quick look at how activists nationwide celebrate while keeping up the good fight. SCOTUS is apparently both pro-life and pro-agonizing death. Bill Moyer gives us an update on the Shell No actions, and femicide is just one reason why we still need feminism. But first, let me give you yet another reason. He said take a compliment, like I was mad at a real attempt to tell me something I'd be proud to hear. I'm not proud to wander through this cloud of misogyny, this progress lobotomy. I'd be just fine if instead of that bullshit line, you'd have just said hi. I wasn't raised to hate you, so put that feminazi bullshit away. I wasn't taught to roll my eyes when a man says they're nice, or raise hell if you tell me I'm beautiful. I'm a woman, and if you be a man, you'd understand that a compliment is meant to aim higher than objectifying the person you give it to. And that's not just for me. Respect yourself enough to see how fucking stupid you seem. When you whistle or catcall, all that you're saying is you lack the vocabulary, the very intelligence, post-Neanderthal sense to use your words and say something. When you throw out that line, what you're hoping to find is not a woman but a thing. So I suggest you try that shit on blow-up dolls and rosy palms, because with me, that shit won't fly. I am not a chick. I didn't hatch out of a fucking egg, and I'm not a girl anymore. I'm not a boo, a baby, a hey you, a sweetie, a cutie, and don't fucking tell me to smile. And even just that you're taken aback that I'm talking back. I should be so bold to hold you accountable for the mind-numbing, brain-dumbing bile dribbling out of your mouth. Would you talk to a man that way? Would you call him a bitch for calling you out? I doubt you ever even thought of it that way. Sexism isn't just slaps to the face, it's a covert disgrace on a social, political stage, a collective black eye on half the damn human race, a lower wage, respect never paid, our bodies just pawns in rich white men games. Damn right I got rage, for this which perpetuates. I'm not out here for your fucking entertainment. My vagina is innocent of war crimes, unlike the suits and ties you don't care enough to regulate. And if you don't see how your degrading lines tie into this rhyme, then you need to spend some time with your own mind, thinking why you see me as a thing to objectify. Then let's meet back at this corner, explore the humanity, starting off with a simple, single hi. I may be a dreamer, but I can imagine a time when you wouldn't think I'm insane to suggest that you could change. But I know that's on you, and me, I'll keep walking and hope to see you on the front lines. For women, for men, for people and planet. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out. Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. As you can see, we're back in the Devil's Den, because of course I couldn't miss this crazy kid's birthday. Happy belated 239th. I'm not gonna lie, you've fucked up a lot in these 239 years, but it's not too late to change your ways. In honor of this push for change, several organizations hosted creative July 4th actions and events to not only tap into the party vibe, but to couple it with a paradigm of change. That rebellious drive that's scribbled into the DNA, etched into the soul of this fucking loony place we all call home. Like an activist party planner, let me show you some examples of how activists around the US celebrated July 4th. And hey, if I missed you, drop me a line and let me know. Take a look. Now, US pride aside, you all know my feelings on American exceptionalism. We're certainly not the greatest. We are in fact lagging in pretty much everything besides military spending. Actually, I take that back. We're also the only country in the Western industrialized world that still kills people in order to prove how wrong it is to kill people. Yep, the death penalty is and has been growing strong in the US since but a brief 10-year moratorium ending in January 1977 with the death of Gary Gilmore via firing squad. Yeah, a firing squad. Apparently Obama isn't the only one who's good at killing people. But what's sick is we actually seem to enjoy it. There's no fucking reason that we should still have the death penalty besides the fact that we just feel like it. And because that's just how we do things. An argument that was actually used by Justice Alito in the most recent Supreme Court case dealing with lethal injections. And I'll get to that case in a minute, but first, let's just list 5 reasons why the death penalty holds no place in modern society. First off, it doesn't work, both in terms of a deterrent and an administration, as we shall see. The murder rate in non-death penalty states, of which there are 19, is consistently lower than those with the death penalty. Secondly, it's racist. And not just in the way that you'd think. In the vast majority of cases, a full 77% were given the death penalty when the victim was white, compared to only 15% African American victims and 6% Hispanic. And on top of that, African Americans are 3 times as likely as white defendants to receive the death penalty when the victim is white. Yay, justice. Thirdly, it fucks up. Yeah, imagine that. In a crooked justice system, innocent people end up behind bars, and death row is no exception. Since 1976, 151 people have been released from death row due to unavoidable evidence of their innocence. And as a recent U.S. death row study showed, 4% of defendants waiting to be executed are innocent. That may not sound like a lot, but it amounts to about 200 people. And this is just today. Imagine how many of the people put to death since 1976 have actually been innocent. Fourth, it costs more. Now, it may seem morbid to consider the price of someone's life, but this is an argument that comes up a lot with capital punishment supporters. So let's take a look. Cases without the death penalty cost an average of $740,000, while cases with the death penalty cost an average of $1.26 million. And maintaining each death row inmate costs about $90,000 more a year than a prisoner in the general population. Why? Well, mostly because of legal costs. It simply costs more money to seek the death penalty. Everything from more intensive jury selection, trials, and the appeals process to the added security and practices such as solitary confinement and on death row. And finally, it's just fucking inhumane. And I understand this fifth argument draws upon the concept of morals and ethics, but even setting aside the eye for an eye makes a whole world blind argument, killing someone is one thing, but torturing them to death is another. Which brings us back to this most recent Supreme Court case, where the court ruled last week that lethal injection is A-okay. What was basically up for debate was whether a certain drug in the lethal injection cocktail violated prisoners' Eighth Amendment rights concerning a torturous, agonizing death. The issue of capital punishment itself wasn't even up for debate, although in his dissenting opinion, Justice Stephen Breyer wrote that the death penalty, in and of itself, now likely constitutes a legally prohibited, cruel, and unusual punishment. Regardless of his dissent and the fact that supporting evidence was taken from drugs.com, a site that explicitly states its information is not intended for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, the Supreme Court voted 5-4 to continue the use of midazolam, a controversial drug for use in lethal injections, mostly because it doesn't fucking work. So, backstory. Lethal injections consist of a 3-part cocktail. The first part, formerly sodium thiopental, FYI doctors, I'm seriously sorry if I'm mispronouncing the shit out of these words. This was used to anesthetize the prisoner. The second drug induces paralysis. The second step in and of itself has sparked controversy, as it was originally added to the cocktail simply to avoid having to see the patient suffer. Lovely. And the third, potassium chloride, stops the heart. Now, this first drug, thank you, this first drug is particularly important because without it, the effects of the second and third drugs would be, quote-unquote, indisputably excruciating, akin akin to being burned alive, a fact that was corroborated by Charles Warner 1 week before the court began hearing arguments. His last words were recorded as, "My body is on fire." So what about that first drug? Well, due to shortages of that first drug, states began using midazolam, an anti-anxiety drug supposed to make patients feel calm and sleepy, which in the case of being burned alive seems a bit like giving a Band-Aid to someone who's just been partially decapitated. Even the supplier of midazolam, Acorn, sent an urgent letter to the Oklahoma Attorney General stating that using midazolam in lethal injections is quote-unquote clearly contradictory to its intended FDA-approved use. This letter came after the now infamous execution of Clayton Lockett, whose botched execution became one of several catalysts for the lethal injection Supreme Court case. On April 29th of last year, Lockett was strapped to a gurney in Oklahoma and injected with the 3-part cocktail, beginning with midazolam. What followed was an excruciating ordeal lasting more than half an hour, where Lockett seized, writhed, moaned, bled, and attempted to speak, while doctors frantically tried to figure out what the fuck was going on. It was pretty obvious, though, that this man was neither unconscious nor unaware of any pain. And according to the Supreme Court, not only is this not a big deal, it's also not their problem. Yeah, according to them, it's actually up to the plaintiffs themselves to suggest better alternatives to the current cocktail. And while Justice Alito and Scalia agreed that midazolam isn't perfect, it's the best we have right now, so unless you animals in solitary confinement can think up anything better, deal with it. Furthermore, supporters Justice Alito and Scalia effectively blamed the work of activists for why this shit is the best we've got and why this case even landed on their benches in the first place, citing pressure on international suppliers from death penalty abolitionists that made it difficult to find that first pain-reducing drug. So therefore, it's also activists' fault that following this shortage in supply, even before Lockett, prisoners were executed, sometimes torturously, with drugs that were expired, adopted in secret, and or acquired in violation of federal law. Dear Alito, Scalia, you dumb fucks. Let me explain. First off, don't take your evidence from the medical equivalent of a Cosmos sex guide. And secondly, it's not a matter of supply shortages. It's a matter of purposeful torture. It's the fact that you want these people to suffer. How fucking easy would it be, for example, to inject them with a high dose of morphine? But no, that would be too easy. They wouldn't suffer. And god damn it, we want them to suffer. We want the death penalty because America. Don't cloak your disdain for the human race with some bullshit finger-pointing at people actually attempting to make the world better. Activists are not at fault. The system is at fault. As Amnesty International puts it, the death penalty is a symptom of a culture of violence, not a solution to it. Without any hesitation, Alito, Scalia, you corporatized, sadistic, sociopathic rejects, you have easily earned the Low-Life Scum Award of the Week.
You low-life scum.
For more information and to get involved in the fight against the death penalty with those damn activists, visit nodeathpenalty.org. Now, moving on, it's been a while since we checked in with the Shell No activists, and as you might have heard, the Shell rig, Arctic Destroyer, sometimes mispronounced Arctic Explorer, left Seattle's harbor last month, but that hasn't kept activists from following the big ugly bastard in a continued attempt to stop Arctic drilling. Here to give us an update on their work is Backbone Campaign's Bill Moyer. Take a look. So real quick, just give me an update on what's been happening in Seattle. The Arctic Destroyer did leave. Give me an update on that and what the upcoming actions you have planned are.
What happened with when the big rig left was really there were two actions. Greenpeace had an action that they did that a line across the Duwamish that was cut almost immediately, and then we had the flotilla behind that, and we didn't get as much time to mobilize people as we wanted to, but we still had dozens of really courageous folks who were out there on the water, and it was intense because we had this gigantic rig, and these big tugboats coming at us, which we didn't think we were going to have. We thought we were going to be holding space and keeping them from untying, and then the Coast Guard actually allowed them to untie and come right at us. So that was That was a little shocking, but we learned a lot. We also learned a lot about our own capacity and the difference between actions that need surprise and actions that need mobilization. So, Greenpeace had an action that needed surprise, but we had an action that needed mobilization, and we didn't need surprise. We could have been pumping people out there for 48 hours, and it would have worked great, way better probably. So there were some trade-offs that didn't really work out that great for the local people. And we went up and we did light projection on it. We tried and some other the Shell No light panels one night. So that was interesting. Do night paddling again, and do some on water tactics. That was cool. And so when we heard it would leave, we had about 20 people in the water, 15 kayaks, and our support boat. And again, it's just amazing because you're out in the most beautiful place, in the Puget Sound, during sunrise, and it's gorgeous, but it's tragic at the same time because you got these ships coming at you, and the police boats and the Coast Guard, and it's just really freaking challenging. It's hard, and it's so beautiful, and people are so beautiful. The people who went out there are really super courageous. And they paddle in, and then they take a penalty. They get pulled out of their kayak. The Coast Guard is pretty good at this, and the Coast Guard and the police. So we've got some work to do, and that's really where we're at now. I think people need rest. We've had some celebration recently. That's been good. People are regrouping. There's a lot of grief, and there should be a lot of acknowledgement of the kind of work that we've all done together and how much courage it took to do what we did do. Because right now there's kayaktivists in Denmark. I mean, when was the last time we did an action and then all of a sudden it starts blossoming all over the world? It's beautiful. I think this whole kayaktivism thing, the being on the water, such a spiritual experience anyway, it was a huge success. It's made our movement stronger, and we brought a lot of new folks in, and we learned a lot of skills. So our next step really is going to action camp on August 11th through the 17th. When we do localize this action camp, we'll have a really strong track that is just dealing with on-water action, and we'll be able to innovate some more tactics that people have been talking about and get ready for the next time that we get to utilize kayaktivists.
To learn more about Shell No and to get involved via their coalition of organizations, visit shellno.org. Now, to call you back to what I mentioned at the beginning of the show, misogyny and sexism is clearly alive and well. And you don't need me to tell that to you. And if you do, seriously, then you really need to watch this segment. In a recent article, Dr. Dabney Evans outlines what she calls the hate crime that you never hear about, namely femicide, the killing of women because of their gender. According to the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, 35.6% of American women have experienced rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner. The impact of that violence can include physical injury, psychological distress, loss of work, and the need for legal services. Nearly 3,000 women are murdered in the U.S. each year, and just over half are committed by women's partners. Numbers, numbers, numbers. What's the point? Well, Evans's point is to not only lift up the veil on violence against women, but to push for the understanding of a hate crime to include femicide, and to push for federal legislation specifically naming femicide. Now, if part of you shrugs or feels slightly uncomfortable at the thought of calling femicide a hate crime, or calling yourself a feminist, or even giving sway to feminism in general, you should watch this video. But also, Dr. Heidi Lewis will ask you to ask yourself why. Why does that bother you? Dr. Heidi Lewis is a professor at Colorado College in the Feminist and Gender Studies program. She hosts a blog called Fem Geniuses and writes for the Feminist Wire. We caught up with her when she was in Berlin teaching a course entitled Hidden Spaces, Hidden Narratives. Here's what she has to say about feminism today.
There are still strong, long-lasting misconceptions about what feminism even is. Most of the things that people want to talk to me about that have a very limited knowledge of feminism is what it is. What is it? You know, what does it do? What is it for? Who is it for? Who is it? Who created it? And things like that. But the problem I think that we still have, and this is why theory is so important to me, the ways that people think are really important to me, because people still think incorrect or problematic things about what feminism is. So that if we say, you know, X is a feminist way of thinking, for instance, if I'm talking, like people are unaware to this day that feminism is concerned with things other than women or gender. So that the Feminist Wire was an important space for me before I became a member of the team, because it was doing the work of reminding people that feminism has always been about more than just gender, more than just women. Feminism for me is about justice, injustice, oppression, sinners, margins. So my feminism, even though it's focused specifically on Black communities typically and media and popular culture, my feminism is one that is always concerned with the impetuses for and implications of oppression, whether we're talking individual level, local level, national level, global level, systemic level.
You say your feminism is not just about, women. And I think that's a very important point, because feminism really does tie to all of these issues, because it is about equality through the sexes, through the races, through classes. So I'm curious specifically about the role of women, not just in promoting this concept of feminism that is not just, feminazi or, those hashtags, feminism is awful, feminism is cruelty, how to spot a feminist. Mm-hmm. How do you see women and particularly stepping away from this, and even allies, men or the LGBT community? How do you see people stepping away from this this sort of corporatized mentality about feminism?
A lot of anti-feminism is sexist. So that, just for instance, today, my students and I were in Germany, we're in Berlin, doing some studying about injustice, oppression, marginalization, resistance in Berlin, marginalized people and communities. And one of my students asked a question that I get often, and she asked, there was some depiction of a feminist and there was some angry looking stuff around the depiction. And the student asked, and this isn't unique to her, why do feminists continue to allow themselves to be portrayed this way when there's such a stigma around the angry? And that's sexist. Gordon Ramsay has made millions of dollars profiting from rage. This man screams and yells and throws things and is very verbally violent. And he has a TV show. Bill O'Reilly is one of the angriest people on television today. There are many cases that we can point. Eminem has made a $1 billion rap career being pretty much angry at everyone, from his mother to the mother of his children, his ex-wife. But the only time anger becomes problematic is when women are angry, because women are not supposed to be angry. And especially if you're a woman of color and a Black woman, as I am, you really aren't supposed to be angry. You're supposed to just, or there's going to be a stereotype about you. You're going to feel like, people are going to be uncomfortable because anger is power. Audre Lorde writes about the uses of anger, and anger as a source of power, a source of strength, a source of resistance, right? Rebellion. And so the people who sort of are interested in figuring out how to resist those kinds of feminazi, which I hate to even say out of my mouth, but feminism is awful. I think one of the things they could also do, they could ask people to think about those things. What is it about feminism that is awful? What is it about birth control that is awful? What is it about, what is it about, not necessarily equality, but egalitarianism, where we're being fair to people? What is it about that that's awful? And another thing I think too is this expectation. So the anger creates a barrier, and we have to remind people, we have to re-theorize anger, because that's one of our biggest challenges, is our anger being used against us. So instead of people being angry with us about inequality and oppression, they're mad at us for being angry about it. Yeah. But the other thing is that there's this expectation that we all do the same things in the same way. So I've been using this little or this little saying lately, you wouldn't go to a dentist to get a pap smear, and you wouldn't go to a gynecologist to get a cavity filled, but they're both doctors in the medical field, right? There's a way in which feminism gets sort of boiled down that we all do the same thing. We're all very different. We're very different people, women, men, people who do not identify as male or female, where some of us are cisgender, some of us are transgender, some of us are heterosexual, and we all take very different approaches to eradicating and theorizing and then eradicating oppression. But the fact that the knowledges that we have and the politics that we have are not respected means that people don't take the kind of care to understand the complexities of our communities. And we perpetuate it sometimes by being so thirsty to have a platform that we flatten it also. But I think that's one of the things that people can do too when it comes to these types of simplistic hashtags, is to just remind people that we are more complex than they understand, because sometimes they just really don't know. They're just literally ignorant, and I mean by not knowing.
And I think that's really interesting too, because it speaks to the idea that there are so many different ways that we can fight the issues that are laid out in front of us, and it doesn't have to be. You don't have to go to something you're not comfortable with. You can say, what is my issue? What is my story? Which leads me to the last question I'll ask you really quickly.
Okay.
The personal is political, and that's a very powerful concept. And I think a lot of people feel that, well, my story is not important, or I have nothing to say. I'm not political. And how would you say that just by existing in this place, this time, this political stage, you are political? How would you speak to that?
Well, I go back to this sort of, because I get this question too from students often. I go back to the idea that politics are a way, put simply, of course it's much more complicated than this, but politics are, a way of doing, and we do things all the time, and those things have implications that travel for much further than us. Empathy is not something that we are taught, right? We live within a so-called meritocracy, a rugged individualism. It's all about me. We built it. I did this. I did that. I. And so it's hard for us to go back and try to get people to have empathy for someone else. So the personal is political for me is not just about me being important, but me recognizing that other people, I share a space with people, and what I do has implications for not just me, but for other people.
For more on Heidi Lewis and her work, check out femgeniuses.com. And that about does it for this week. Thank you so much for watching. Please spread and share this with all of your friends, foes, and people you don't know. And as always, check out the last slide to see all the sites that I mentioned in this week's show. There will also be a link to help support Occupy.com and all of the delicious dissent delivered daily thanks to donations like yours. It is a 501c3, so anything you can contribute is tax deductible and hugely appreciated. Be sure to follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube. From this hot and humid home of low-life scum and awesome activists alike, good night and act out.